Hello, and thank you for watching this video on the proper and safe operation of the vacuum former here at TC Maker. I'll go over some important safety information as well as how to properly set up and operate the machine. This machine is fairly easy to operate and is overall a very safe machine to use. There are a few things you need to be aware of when using this vacuum former. The first thing I want you to be aware of is that this process requires the plastic to be heated to a temperature of 185 to 260 degrees. To do this, there is a heater mounted on top of the machine. The top of the machine is open. This is to allow heat to escape as to not overheat the heater. But if anything is placed up there, this would be a fire hazard. Also, it is above eye level, so it would be easy to miss something if something were placed up there. So with that in mind, always check above the machine before turning the heaters on, just to make sure that something wasn't placed up there and you were not aware of it. And finally, in regards to the heater, these surfaces become hot when the plastic is being heated. So keep in mind that this surface here is too hot to touch during the operation of heating the plastic. The frames themselves become at least as hot as the plastic during the heating process, and the metal frame holds the heat much longer than the plastic itself. So when you're removing the plastic, you need to keep in mind that these frames are going to remain hot for some time. So you should always wear gloves when removing the plastic from the frame. So as you can see, the machine has got a fine layer of dust pretty much covering all the surfaces. That's because the machine is located in the corner of the wood shop near the dust collectors. And this tends to just kind of blanket the machine with a layer of dust. So before we start using the machine, it's always a good idea, it's actually a must, to take and clean off the machine before operation. This includes above the machine the top surface of the heater, because that gets a fine layer of dust on it, and when it heats up it will stink, and nobody wants that. So what I recommend you do is to get the air hose from around the corner and blow the machine off thoroughly before you begin the process of doing any vacuum forming. So first thing, you want to make sure you're wearing some eye protection before you start to blow off the dust. And then start with the top of the machine and blow off the area above, because that's where the dust is going to collect, and when it gets hot it will stink. So once you've thoroughly blown off the top, then proceed to the other surfaces. Blow off the area here, because dust is not your friend when it comes to vacuum forming. If you're looking for a fine, smooth surface, it can actually just really mess that up for you. And then finally, blow off the vacuum pump itself. We don't want to get any dust in that as well. So once you've blown off the surfaces, you're basically ready to start vacuum forming. So now you're ready to start vacuum forming. So the frame is fairly heavy, weighs probably 10 pounds, and when you raise it up to the heat, the arms over center and they lock in the upright position. But it wouldn't take too much to actually bump them past center and have the frame come down uncontrolled. So with that, we have these locking pins that need to be placed in there to prevent the frame from coming down unexpectedly. This is something that you need to do if you're going to be working underneath the frames when they're in the upright position. Now, the frame itself will stay up. It's not going to come down unless it gets hit pretty hard. So these pins don't have to be in place during the heating process. They're just there as a safety measure if you're going to be working for some time on positioning your buck and working on the platen, etc. They're there to keep you from having it come down unexpectedly. The last thing I need you to be aware of is when raising and lowering the frame, the arms swing down and there needs to be clearance behind the machine so that when this frame comes down, there's no obstruction behind the machine for the arms to come down on. So this brings us to the basic setup of the machine, and I'll go into more detail of setting up the machine in the vacuum forming class, but in this video I want to show you just a few basics. First off is you need to be aware of the size platen you need to use for whatever part you intend to form. If your platen is too large, you'll have too much excess plastic and you'll end up with a problem with webbing. So when you decide the size of your platen, you need to adjust the size of the frame. And to do that, the tools to do that are over here in the corner on the shelf. There is a small wrench that I can't seem to get out of the holder, and the bolts that are the appropriate size for the frame are also stored here, and down below are the square tubing that makes up the internal portions of the frame. So once you've decided on the appropriate size of your platen, you need to get the corresponding parts out for the frame to assemble the frame into the size you need. Now, one thing I want you to be aware of is that these bolts are 1/2 inch bolts, and that's really large enough to hold the wheels on a semi truck, and this is just lightweight tubing. So for that reason I purposely chose this little short stubby handled ratchet, and that's so that you can't really get the leverage to crank that bolt in enough to actually crush the frames. So if you're wondering why I'm asking you to use this stubby little ratchet to assemble it, that's the reason. So when you go to assemble the frame, you want to leave all the bolts loose. You want to have basically everything all screwed together before you actually start to tighten anything up. So all these frames should just simply be loose in there until you're ready to have the entire assembly made. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm just putting in the bolts, getting the frame started. So I'm going to skip ahead until I've got the frame assembled. So there you have it. That's basically the machine set up for a 12 by 12 platen. And just one more important thing to show you before we move on to how to operate the pump and the heaters. So when you're loading the frame, you need to be aware that this frame here, even though it is got some sort of gas struts on there to help hold it open, it still can come down and close with some force. So just be aware that if it's wide open, you don't want it to come slamming down onto your fingers. Prior to operating the vacuum pump, the sight glass here on the side of the pump needs to be checked for the oil level. The oil level can't get below that lower line. If it is, the pump should not be used. What we're looking at here are the switches that control the heaters. The heater is divided into 4 different zones. The first switch here controls zone 1, which is the center's 2 heating panels. The second switch controls zone 2, which is the next 2 panels outward, and then the third switch and fourth switch control the third and fourth panels. So the next switch we have is the switch that turns the vacuum pump on. As you can see, the gauge then reads out how much vacuum is being generated by the pump, and that gauge reads out in inches of mercury. And the red button in the center, that is the vacuum release. When you push that, that opens the valve that actually pulls the plastic down and creates your vacuum form. Okay, so what we're looking at here is the zones that I was talking about before on the switches. So the 2 center panels you see heating up now are controlled by the switch, the first switch, which is zone 1. And then when you flick the second switch, the next 2 panels will begin to heat up. That is this, switch 2 and also zone 2, as you can see them starting to heat there. And then the third switch would then heat the next 2 panels, and the fourth switch the 2 outermost panels. This allows you to only heat the area for which you have the frame set up for. So the last 2 things I want to show you is the second use for the safety pins. They can be placed through the side rails, and that allows you to have a midpoint where you can lower the frame to, so that way you can load the plastic or adjust your bucks down below without having the frame in your way. And then in addition to showing you that, I want to show you a little detail about the Platens. The Platens are all marked front because it basically only fits correctly in the machine one way, and that's with the front label on the Platen facing the front of the machine. And then, as you can see there, the Platen fits over that little piece of PVC pipe that is protruding up. So that's pretty much everything I wanted to show you about setting up and operating the machine. Last thing, when you're finished for the day, turn off the main breaker, and that will shut down the machine. Be sure to do that, or the vacuum gauge will stay energized and be on all night long. I want to thank you for taking the time to watch this video on the operation of the vacuum former, and for putting up with me for 15 minutes during this video. So again, thank you for watching the video, and take another couple minutes to just watch the vacuum former in action.